From buying sheep and using them as natural lawnmowers to coming up with the craziest way to control his animals, here's Jeremy Clarkson's genius guide to successful farming. What's interesting about this guy is that he loves going big. But hey, going big doesn't always mean a good thing. And a pretty good example of that was when Clarkson went to buy a tractor. Without weighing the pros or cons, or taking the advice of experts, he got a Lamborghini R8. Thinking it would impress everyone. Yep, even the name sounds incredibly expensive. And the tractor is huge, because it literally weighs 10 tons. Not only that, but the tractor also has 40 forward gears and 40 reverse gears. But aside from the sheer size and the bedazzling details, what Clarkson didn't realize was that it's too big. Well, until his friends pointed it out. But it was too late by then. You see, when you're getting something that big, you need to figure out whether the parking space will withhold it. And we look at Clarkson driving it around in his show. It's clear that the tractor is sometimes even too big to fit inside a barn. Oh, and before you start buying a vehicle that's insanely big, make sure you know how to drive one too. Because after getting his tractor, Clarkson couldn't even drive in a straight line. And if you're not drilling in a straight line, chances are you're gonna miss drilling some areas into the ground, which means it'll also be hard for you to cover the area next to it when you come back with your tractor. The funny thing is that even though Clarkson keeps buying expensive things and then fails to use them properly, he still keeps buying them. Like the time when he got a sheep drone. Okay, I think in this one, he did try to direct the sheep on his own, and it didn't work out, so I'll give him that. But his second option, to use a drone as a scaring device in order to make the sheep run in a certain direction, wasn't that great either. Well, it did work the first time, but then the sheep just got used to the drone and they would just ignore it completely.
It cost $2,500. And it was money well spent. Look at it, it's working. Look at it. Yes, come on, through the gate.
Or sometimes they would get super scared and just run away in 1,000 different directions. When that happened, it was then somebody else who had to get the sheep back, because Clarkson was obviously the last person they'd listen to. So, in a 5-minute hack like that, not only are you not getting anywhere in the long run, but you also end up wasting someone else's time for solving a problem you created. So the lesson here? Be patient and learn how to control your sheep the old-fashioned way. It may look like a pretty slow process, but it saves a whole lot of trouble in the future. 10 points for the genius idea though. When it comes to the sheep, this isn't the only time Clarkson tried to find an easy way out, because he thought it would be easier to use sheep as a natural lawnmower without realizing how expensive that option would be. The way Clarkson saw this was that the sheep would keep the grass nice and tidy. They'd fertilize the soil, and he could also sell their babies for profits. Okay, number one, Clarkson spent almost $15,000 getting these sheep, which I'm pretty sure is way more than what a lawnmower would have cost him. Also, he realized at some point that when he got the lambs, one of them cost him around $125. But when it came to selling the same one, he could only sell it for $64. So yeah, that's obviously a big loss. It was at this point that he realized that it could have just taken him an hour to mow the lawn with a proper lawnmower, and it would have benefited him too, because he could have also sold the hay. So I guess what you need to know is that sometimes hard work is way cheaper than the first time-saving technique that comes to your head. Another recurring problem you'll probably see in Clarkson's show is that he usually doesn't calculate properly. If the sheep incident was any indication, it's that he should really start consulting people when buying or renting things out. In one of the instances on his farm though, they were harvesting grain from the 10 acres they had planted. and for that they needed lorries. What Clarkson hadn't anticipated was the number of lorries he would actually need, so he only got one and called it a day. But when the grain was getting loaded onto the lorry, he realized he would need a lot more to hold the insane amount he had harvested. In fact, according to his friend, he needed to have at least 20 lorries. Jeremy, this is exactly the moment when you go big. Anyway, they had to go back and forth from the harvesting site to the loading site. Oh, and this was a problem he couldn't even fix because they started harvesting late in the evening on a Saturday. And since the next day was Sunday, it was pretty evident they wouldn't be able to get any more lorries to come in on a weekend. So apart from keeping your calculations in order, it seems like making sure you're aware of the possibilities also matters a lot. As far as Clarkson's genius ideas go though, not all of them turned out to be last-minute hacks. I mean, it was pretty cool what he decided to do in order to give back to nature, like taking his tractor around an open field in the middle of forested areas and digging a hole inside it for a pond, which was also a pretty quick process that I'm sure will help inhabit a lot of species in it in no time. Then, he also decided to chop off a few trees in some places of the forest. The idea was to let the sunlight come in, since the canopy often gets in the way, and when it rains, you can even see a few puddles on the ground, which is good for beetles, birds, and bees. But apart from helping Mother Nature, you'd be surprised to hear that there was a point when one of his time-saving hacks actually did help him. This was when he was given electrical wires and then asked to go around the land 3 times. The idea was to construct an electrical fence, but we all know this man will end up thinking of the fastest way of doing it, right? So what does he do? He holds the roll with the electric wiring rolled around it, sits in his car, and then slowly drives around the land, while simultaneously wrapping it around the wooden planks that are supposed to keep the wire in place. And voila, this did allow him to get the job done pretty quickly. But get this, when it's time to activate the electricity in these wires, he doesn't realize he needs to be extra cautious and ends up electrocuting himself. In the end, despite all of the failed attempts, one of the cutest things that he's done is giving back to his community. There was a moment in the show when he took sacks of potatoes that he'd gotten from his farm and then went into the locality nearby to donate some of the sacks. After dropping those sacks off at the houses all by himself, he even stays around to chat with some of the locals. I guess the reason why people still keep helping him so much, even though he ends up creating more work for them, is that he's just so darn charming. Well, that's all for Jeremy Clarkson's Genius Guide to Successful Farming.